Okay, and we are back again. So, welcome back. We have Lynn Hanning to talk to us about uh, the Pernambuco crisis, CITES, changes, and ramifications. The transport and use of Pernambuco wood is being challenged, and with an upcoming vote on November 14th. As musicians and archetiers face travel and resource limitations and conservation policies, Lynn will discuss the potential impact of new regulations along with the global collaborative efforts to support the environment, reuse materials, and how we can keep the culture alive in a changing landscape. Lynn, are you here?
Yes, I am.
All right, welcome. This is a lot to go through, so I'm going to pass it straight on to you.
Somebody was going to help me with the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, let me get that queued up. One moment.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Michelle's our tech god controlling all of this. So
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll leave you in her capable hands.
Okay, are there any videos as a part of this presentation?
Just the PowerPoint and me talking.
All right, we're ready to roll.
Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity to speak about Pernambuco at this really challenging and confusing time. Next page. Or do I do the next page? There we go. Materials used in instrument and bow making. I just wanted to say that my career has been about 50 years in length, and during that 50 years, all of these species have either become threatened or endangered. I came to realize that it's not just what we use, but how we use the species that is ultimately most important. Using species in an unsustainable way is just simply not acceptable. We need to find a better way. And I believe that women can be a real driving force in this effort. If we look down that list, we see rosewood that's no longer available to us for guitar making. There are species of ebony that are no longer available to us, and what's left is threatened. Maple, which might be a surprise to some of you, is being cut at a very dangerous, rapid rate in Eastern Europe. And that was even before the war in Ukraine. And I'm certain that the disruption to heating oil coming into a winter season is going to put a real strain on those forests as well. Abalone is out, whalebone is out, monitor lizard skin is out. Pernambuco is on the forefront right now, and we'll find out what its fate will be. Brazil wood is funny. People think it's a separate species, but it's actually just if you look at that picture, you see the heartwood, which is Pernambuco, and the circle around it, which is the Brazil wood. Both of those are the same species, however. Ipe will also be on the upcoming CITES agenda. And because it's so difficult to tell one species from another, all 300 Ipe species will go to a listing. Ivory is out, tortoiseshell is out. Very few of our shells. It's a dwindling number of shell that we can use for any of the ornamentation on our bows. So it's a challenging time for all of those species and for us as bow makers. Next. A little bit of information about CITES. It's an organization with a very long name, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Big name, and a very big and very important job. Its job is to protect the growing number of threatened species all over the world and to support solutions for sustainable use. So what is CITES? CITES is a part of the United Nations. It's got about 185 country members. They're called parties. So when they have a CITES meeting, they don't call it a CITES meeting. They call it a Conference of the Parties, or a COP, C-O-P. They vote on all these many species. We think so right now with such concern about Pernambuco, but they're representatives have so many species that Pernambuco is simply just one of many, many species that they need to be informed about and make decisions about. They get to vote on which appendix level would be appropriate for the threat to the species. So it could either be an appendix 1, which is going to be the strictest listing, or 2 or 3. And then there is something called annotations, which are just restrictions that can be put on there to clarify exactly what they mean by their appendix 2. So just a tiny bit of history. There were Brazilian laws which included Pernambuco as an endangered species long before it went to CITES. And in 2000, bowmakers from all over the world got together and created an organization called IPCI, International Pernambuco Conservation Initiative. The goal was to work with scientists in Brazil and to create a management plan for Pernambuco to save the species, to save the genetic diversity of the species, to reforest, to work towards future sustainable use. However, in 2007, Brazil went to CITES with a request to list Pernambuco. I spoke at that meeting representing the IPCI. We went there with the goal of supporting our work so that it could continue. But we also saw this particular model and its successes that we had had in the years prior to that. For other species in other parts of the world where the users of the resource could drive the conservation of the species. The results that we got had restrictions, import and export duties that were required, regulations that were required on raw materials, but no restrictions at all on finished bows, so musicians could continue to travel freely. Well, time passed and more scientific research was done and more trees were planted. However, there was also the discovery of some illegal cutting that was very upsetting to people in Brazil, and rightly so. And so in 2022, Brazil made a formal request to move the listing from an appendix 2 to an appendix 1. And that's going to have a tremendous impact on our whole musical community. It's not even clear, and Brazil states this in their request, it's not even clear that this listing is really in the best interest of conserving the species. I seriously doubt that it is, and they seem to have those same doubts, but they went ahead with the request to list anyway. Next page. So what could it mean to me? What are the consequences of this? I broke it down into sections. For bowmakers, back in 2007, it was important for us to inventory our wood at that time. So makers did an inventory, they took photographs, they had all of that notarized. And in the United States, we were just told to put that with our important papers and forget about it until the time came when we might need it. Well, the time is here and we do need it. So for those people that were careful about that and did their inventories and haven't lost them between 2007 and now, it will be a requirement to bring those papers to CITES for official registration. And in the United States, unless things change, that would be within 90 days of the vote. So the only allowable wood for bow making is going to be that wood that's documented pre-2007. People who bought wood since 2007, if we go to a strict CITES 1 listing, that wood would not be usable for bows, which is really unfortunate. Every bow sale will need to have CITES documentation. I think beginner bow makers will be hard hit by this because many of them are younger and not around during the pre-2007 wood. So they'll need to be careful to be buying from documented sources. They'll need to be extra careful to be abiding by the CITES rules. for musicians, they have to know that their bows are made out of pre-2007 CITES Pernambuco, CITES verified Pernambuco. And this is going to be a challenge because a lot of musicians don't have the original bills of sale for their bows. They'll probably need to have some kind of appraisal done on it so that they know for sure what they've got. And then they'll need to take that to CITES and they'll need to get a musical instrument certificate. This is not a streamlined process. And I think it's going to be a very big challenge for our CITES management authorities to be able to handle the volume of bows that people are going to present them with. Shops, bow makers, musicians, all needing certificates at the same time. I don't see that they have the capacity for that, but that's something that would need to be worked out. The musicians would have to go through a limited number of ports of entry, which would be challenging. I looked at the list in the United States and there was nothing for me closer to where I live in Maine than going through airports in New York. So I would no longer be able to fly out of Boston, which I normally do. So I would have to find an airport where they had somebody there to help me with my bows. There are going to be different regulations and different documents that might be required for different countries. Everybody's going to have to abide by whatever the vote is in November. But there are countries that add to that. They add on stricter regulations. I know Germany is very strict, for example. They'll be adding on different regulations. And so the traveling musician is going to have to be pretty prepared and pretty well educated to have the documentation they need on their own bows to be able to get back into the country safely with them. And they're going to need to have whatever they need for additional documentation for these other countries where they might be passing through or traveling. There's going to be a reoccurring cost for this. You don't just get a musical instrument certificate and it lasts forever. I think it lasts, the ones that I've seen cost about $75. They last from 1 to 3 years. And so there'll be a regular need to get new musical instrument certificates. And just for musicians, and this is very important for you to share, I've spoken to 3 people who own insurance companies, and I told them about my concerns on this, that musicians wouldn't know all the rules, they'd go through the wrong airport, or they wouldn't have the right documentation, and they risk having their bows confiscated. Well, all 3 of the insurance company owners said that confiscations were not covered by their insurance policies. And so musicians who think they're well protected and particularly important when they're traveling are going to find out the hard way that they do not have insurance that covers confiscations. So that's something that we really need to share with the musical community. Shops are going to need to verify that all bows are wood pre-2007, all bows. We're talking about new ones. We're talking about antique bows, all bows. Every shop is going to have to do a lot of documentation to sell bows on each of the individual bows. The impact that this might have on repairers or restorers is still to be determined. I don't know exactly how that will play out, but it's concerning, certainly, as we want to keep those older bows in as perfect condition as we possibly can. I think it will impact sales, and I think it will have a great impact on auctions, particularly the international auctions. I used to go to Paris for auctions, and then I would just fly home with the bows as carry-on. I don't know that I would be able to do that anymore because I would have to then file for all these documents that would take time, and it wouldn't, I don't know how it would work. I don't see how it would work. And lastly, and I didn't include it on here, I want to just talk about conservation, that all of this work of determining whether a bow is legal Pernambuco or not, and all of the efforts that the musicians will have to make in the shops and the bow makers, all of that undermining of the music industry and how it functions might also be a serious threat to conservation, because it has been my experience that most of our support for the last 20 years of conservation has come from the bow makers and the instrument makers and the musicians. Not so much the musicians, but definitely the makers have been actively involved. And so if for some reason the wood is no longer available to us, what would be the impetus? What would be the desire to spend money planting trees if there would never be the possibility of sustainable use? So there are grave concerns about that. I just want to say something about how it works at the CITES level, because we're just not in there alone as individuals. There's an annotations working group that has developed over the years, and it's grown to be, I think, about 25 international organizations now, representing the stakeholders in the music industry, representing orchestras, Martin guitars, the American Federation of Violin and Bow Makers, all sorts of groups, but all that are stakeholders when it comes to musical instruments, musical travel. They fully support the conservation goals of CITES. So they're not outsiders when it comes to those conservation goals. Those are critically important to everyone. But they're able to bring to the table a deeper understanding of the perhaps unintended consequences of a CITES Appendix 1 listing would have for classical music and for the future of conservation of Pernambuco. They have submitted a proposal that's gone all around the world to all of the CITES management authorities all over the world. And it's a proposal that balances the need for conservation, which we all agree is necessary, and the importance of music around the world. So I just would like to highlight two of the people who have just done so much work for us. John Bennett has been representing the stringed instrument and bow making community for about 12, 13 years now. And Heather Noonan represents the League of American Orchestras, the musicians unions in the United States and Canada, and NAM as well. So she has just worked tirelessly to bring the proposal, the compromise position to the forefront, and to get everybody to, as many people as possible, to sign on to it. It's been a real passion of hers, and I appreciate her work so much. You can help out by going to the alliance-usa.org website and reading that proposal, that music sector proposal. It's right on the homepage of the Alliance USA website. Once you've read it and understand that we can have conservation of the species and protection for our musical traditions, email your CITES representative. The lists are there, also on the homepage, and share your support of the proposal. They know what it is. It's the music sector compromise proposal, and it's getting important reading and comments around the world. Share it with your friends and your colleagues and ask them to do the same with their friends and colleagues. And as Heather said to me the other day, please mention the Alliance homepage so that people can participate. And then she just looked at me and said, every voice matters. And I believe that that's true. So in summary, I think anything can happen when they are together for their meeting in Panama in November. We don't have a crystal ball. They'll be talking about it. They'll be talking about annotations. They'll be talking about everything. And none of that is anything that we are privy to. That's all private conversations. But just rest assured that we have some very, very competent people in there who are working with our best interests at heart. We also have, I don't know whether it will matter or not. I hope it will. We'll just have to wait and see about how influential the work of the IPCI has been and will continue to be in Brazil, and the advocacy work that's growing around the world, including powerful voices like Yo-Yo Ma Whether that will influence the final vote, I don't know. But what I do know is that those of us at the Alliance and those of us at IPCI will continue to do our conservation work. It's very important. IPCI does its work for Pernambuco, and the Alliance works for all the species used in stringed instrument and bow making. AllianceUSA.org website is going to be a good resource for you to learn about conservation around the world, but also to try to clarify the CITES decision. When that's finally made, whatever they decide, we're going to have as much information as we possibly can in order for you to best understand and to comply with those regulations. Next. A different world, a different mindset, a seismic shift, a reverence for life. So again, whatever happens in November, I think what we can do as makers, as lovers of the work that we do, I think we need to focus our attention on finding a better course of action for the future. That old way of just using and using and using until it's all used up and then moving on to another species doesn't work. That's not a good plan for the future. So what are the changes that we can make in our shops right now to greater support conservation? We can stay informed. We need to know what's going on, and I think the Alliance website will be helpful in that. I certainly will share as much information as I can on the Women in Lutherie Facebook pages, and any way that I can disseminate information to you, I would be happy to do that. We need to use materials wisely. We can't just pretend that there's no problem. We have to realize what's going on and that we're a part of the problem unless we're working to conserve these species. Alternates to new wooden student bows is an important one to me. I would like everybody on the planet to avoid that wasteful use of bows that I call disposable bows. Those are bows that are so cheap, they're so poorly made that when it comes time for a rehair, they aren't even worth the cost of a rehair. And so shops just throw them away and then give the person a new bow. What a tremendous waste of resources. It wastes hardwood, including Pernambuco. It wastes ebony, it wastes pearl. That whole disposable bow thing has got to go. Recycling existing wooden bows is really a great option. There are so many bows. Shops have box loads of bows sitting in their closets, and many of them are perfectly usable pieces of wood. Many of them are Pernambuco and strong enough to be very good bows, but maybe the balance is off. Maybe the tip is cracked and needs a repair. Maybe the camber isn't so good and just needs a minor correction. So those kinds of repairs that affect the playability can turn a bow sitting in a box to a perfectly playable and suitable bow. So I recommend that you look around for those. I know every shop's got them. Support companies who support conservation. Here I just am thinking about those people who are working on new and innovative ideas. Sonawood, for example, where they're heating and compressing maple and birch and ash and turning it into something with the density of ebony for fingerboards, for frogs. It's just an innovative idea. The Despio Planet bridges are an excellent alternative. They might have a tiny flaw on them, but it means that so much more of the maple can be used and not just discarded. There are people now that are making harp strings out of biocarbon fiber. For those of you that are concerned about the impact of using carbon fiber, the biocarbon fiber that Lynn and Healy is using right now is made with, instead of fossil fuel, it's made with sugarcane. So we need to support companies and encourage them to try to use this resource. It already exists. Lynn and Healy uses it, airlines use it, aerospace uses it, automobile. So it's there and it's coming. So the more we can do to be supportive of these people who are out there spending money on development would be just great. And lastly, well, not lastly, becoming an active member of conservation is certainly important. Not just saying, I believe in conservation, but actually doing something about it is a very different thing. And that's important. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And now lastly, abiding by international laws. It's the international laws, we can't mess around with them. We'll lose everything if we do that. We've got to cooperate on that. Page turn, please. Working together, sustainable sourcing. Women in Lutherie, I think, has created an incredibly healthy model of sharing and support for its individual makers. That was so different than when I was learning bow making and before that when I was learning as a musician. Things were highly competitive at the conservatory when I was there, and in making, trade secrets were just hidden to give one a competitive edge over one's colleagues. So we've got some opportunities here that I think we as members of Women in Lutherie do very well. We can create a database of these materials that we use and share our ideas. We can help the younger generation get the materials and the information that they need. We can be good consumers by knowing the law and demanding proof of legality. We can't just close our eyes to the fact that there are people out there that are selling illegal wood, and that will become a greater problem as time goes on. Find your way of incorporating a conservation use fee to fund conservation projects in everything that you do. In my shop, I have for the last 15, 16 years, something like that, added $1 to every rehair. It's included in the price of every rehair. Musicians love it. And it's very simple for me at the end of the year to just add up how many rehairs I've done and donate that to the Alliance or to IPCI. And then I make a separate donation with my own money. But that means that of the maybe 450 to 500 bows that I do each year, those are musicians making a substantial donation, and then plus my own. And I just think that that's a really important thing to do, to include the musicians and makers who rely on these valuable natural resources must be part of funding conservation for the sustainable use of wood. It's for their own survival. It's for the survival of the species. It's survival of their jobs as well. Next page. Planting matters. Makers can help to protect quantity and quality of the wood. We found in our work in farms in Brazil, where Pernambuco is being used as shade for other cash crops like cacao. It was really important to train the farmers so that they knew very careful pruning techniques so that the wood would be of value for future bows. And so that was a very important lesson that we learned. You can't just pop the trees there and expect each one of them to be a perfect bow making tree. The pruning techniques really mattered. So being involved in that aspect of it is really important. As a bow maker, as a mother, as a grandmother, I want to leave a legacy of good and ethical work. And I don't want to participate in destroying our planet by either intentional actions, by ignorance, or by complacency. As a musician and a music lover, I believe in the power of music. I think it's the international language. It's one of the wonderful things that bring people together all over the world. And I believe it's worth fighting for. So thank you very much. I'll take questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn.
Yeah.
We do have a question about the transportation of bows on flight. Is it just domestic or is it just domestic, or is it domestic and international flights where it could be confiscated?
CITES is the international transport of endangered species. However, what we don't know is what the countries will add on to that. So I have my own questions about that, but I really do want to continue to be a resource for everyone. I do update the Alliance USA news page regularly, and I'm going to have as much information as I possibly can. And if for some reason I don't answer your question on the news page, please contact me personally and I will go to the CITES representative and get an answer for you and get back to you. So we just don't know yet. Just a few more weeks and we'll have a much better feel for that.
All right, thank you so much. So we are just finishing up time-wise. Is there a way that people could contact you to ask questions or anything about this?
Yes. Somebody could put this up on the page for me. It's Lynn H at lahbose.com. And I'd be happy to answer your questions. Lynn H at lahbose, one big word, .com.
Okay.
There we go.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Thank you very much, Lynn. We really appreciate the talk. This is a really important subject right now. So thank you for taking your time for this.
Thanks.
All right. So we are going to take a short break and regroup in about 4 minutes for Jamie Kirkland's presentation on instrumental women of Fender. See you soon.